There it is, guys. The donor to the 77. I know it looks really rough, but we'll nestle it into this little area here I have by the shop so that I can slowly work on getting this thing apart, which I can imagine is not going to be very easy. All right, let me help this guy out, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, so here's the truck. I'm just going to do a little minor body work to it, get this thing back in shape. Shouldn't take much, nothing a little Bondo and a little polishing compound can't fix. And she should be good as new. But on a serious note, what we're going to do is we're going to take that 7.3 turbo diesel out, a little Powerstroke action, out of this running what used to be driving truck, and we're going to put it into the cabriolet. Nah, just kidding. We're going to stick it into the 1977 F250 green machine, monster truck, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. This thing currently has a pretty nice 351M in it, but it has gone ahead and eaten its camshaft. And after going back and forth a bunch of times, it's just, I don't know. It's just a lot of work to, well, let me backtrack. I was going to put a set of aluminum heads on here, but it being a Cleveland, actually I should say that again, it not being a Cleveland means that you have to get kind of creative to get an intake manifold to fit. You know, the ports on a Cleveland to a modified are a little different. Of course, the heads will bolt to the block, but the problem with a modified is the deck height in this thing is almost an inch taller. So nothing really just kind of bolts over. So some might say, unfortunately, to them I say, you're crazy. Because putting that modern, this is a 2002 Super Duty, putting this 2002 turbo diesel into this will actually make this thing drive much nicer. It'll be able to spin up the tires much easier. You know, you have all that bottom end torque. And both of these are four-wheel drive, so we're going to pull the engine, the transmission, the transfer case, pretty much everything out of here, and we're going to make it fit into this. Now, this isn't anything that hasn't been done before. If you look, there's lots of different ways people have done this. Some people have taken the donor truck like I am and really just body swapped it. They've put in this body onto this truck. This thing is really totaled beyond totaled. The frame's bent. It's not really the way to go. Not to mention, I've done a lot of work onto this. The axles are geared. The axles are rebuilt. You know, it's in really good shape. So it's just a simple, I say simple, simple swap. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to set up the camera. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start here. I'm going to remove the engine, transmission. I'm going to remove all the wiring I need, the dash cluster, basically everything to get this engine into that 77. What am I missing? Am I missing anything? I don't know. I'm basically going to take everything I think I might need and then some. But yeah, let's start tearing this thing apart.
Alright guys, as you can see, we got the motor out. This is actually probably about a week since the time lapse. You know, I've been kind of picking at it here and there as I could in between other jobs. But there's the 7.3 sitting out, this big giant grease ball. Before I do anything to this thing, I'm going to degrease it, pressure wash it, make it clean. Because there's nothing more annoying than being covered in grease and diesel and everything else. It just drives me nuts. And I want to be able to work on this comfortably as I take it in and out of this thing about 100 times. There's the truck, or what's left of it. So you can see I took everything. I took all the harnesses. I do have to still take the harness that goes from here to the transmission, to the fuel pump, the fuel tank, the fuel pump on the rail. I'm also going to take the fuel lines there that go from here to the tank. And then the other things I'm going to take right away before I get rid of this, what's left of this truck, is I'm going to torch off the actual K-member here. If this thing can and will fit into there, it'll make my life much easier. I already have all the mount locations and everything, so I could probably brace it in there pretty well. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the front radiator support. I'm just going to take those two bolts out, and then I'm just going to lop it off with the Sawzall on each side. This side's kind of destroyed anyway. But that way I have all the mounts for the intercoolers, the condenser, everything. Again, I don't know if I'll be able to use it in there, but if I can at least, if I have it at least, I can, you know, cut off these mounts and graft it into the 77. You know, same with the lower mount for the radiator here and there. So again, I don't know what I'm going to need, but I want to make sure I have everything possible, whether I use it or not. You know, I've been looking up a lot of these. Seems like what a lot of people do is they take the body off of this and take the body off of this, put this on that chassis. It's probably an easier way to do it. I don't know. I like to do things the hard way, or the fun way. I'm not really sure yet. Still trying to figure that out. But that's where I'm at. Like I said, I'm going to degrease this engine up. I've got the transmission sitting over there. Clean that up. I'm going to separate it from the transfer case so I can move it around a little easier. But basically from this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the remaining harness out of this, drop the fuel tank out of it. Not that I'll be able to use it in the 77, but that way I have, you know, the pump, the pickup, everything. Everything. I'm making sure I have everything. The other thing I do need to cut out too is I'm going to cut out the rear drive shaft bearing carrier from the frame rail. May or may not use it in the 77. The way I figure it, I'm most likely going to have custom drive shafts made for the front and back, but I'm going to try to position this thing as best I can to avoid a lot of that stuff. So it's just a quick update, guys, of where we're at so far. You know, once I get the engine out of here, I should know more, have a better idea of where things are going to fit, and I'll update you guys again. Okay guys, so as you can see, I've got the motor sitting in there. It's legitimately really just sitting on the exhaust manifolds on the frame. But I had to cut out, let's see if you guys can see this. I had to cut out the cross member that was factory to this 77 chassis so we can get the motor back and down where we needed it to be. The other thing I'm noticing is where I have the motor where I need to get it down. My power steering bracket sits about here, and the way it is right now, the pulley is going to hit the steering box here. So what I did was a few things. I cut a bunch of stuff out of the O2 that I'm going to need, brackets, cross members, basically everything I could to graft the front end of that truck into this one to make it fit. So as you can see here, I've got a lot of room, and you know, granted the motor is sitting back against this. It won't once it's installed. I have more than 3 degrees of incline. I want to be, you know, somewhere in that ballpark, 2-3 degrees at most. But basically, I just wanted to get the engine in to see what kind of interference issues I had. The only thing I'm really concerned about is how close the passenger valve cover is to the heater box. I think if the motor sits this low, I will be able to get it out if needed. Otherwise, the engine would obviously have to be removed. But yeah, aside from having to cut this bracket out here, the motor really just kind of fit into place. So, if I step over to this truck. So basically what I did was, the engine cross member that sat here, all the way across, I cut it out. And then I cut out a big chunk of frame here. And the reason for that is, this is what held the steering box for this truck. And like I was saying before, the steering box on here is just too big, too high, and it's really going to interfere with everything. So I'm going to most likely graph in the steering box from the O2 so I can get this out and get the clearance I need. So let me show you some of the pieces that I have here. There's the engine cradle, and this is basically what I'm going to use. I'm going to make this fit in between the frame rails on that 77. Obviously, the frame rails on the O2 were almost 6 inches wider, so I'm going to basically cut this to the outside of the frame rails as I need, and you know, weld it and get it into place. This is just the bracket for the steering box, and here's the chunk of frame rail that I needed for the steering box. It's got a pocketed hole, mounting poles are there already. This also fits onto that cross member, so that should locate everything nice the way I need it. But that's basically the parts in a nutshell. Alright guys, I'm sure getting tired of all this grinding and stuff here, so I'm going to take a break and update you guys, let you know where I'm at. Besides really dirty, yeah, looking good. Alright, so as you can see there, I've got the old motor mount brackets completely removed off the frame rails. I've got the frame rails roughly cleaned up, not really the greatest. And then I've got the new cross member here, which like I said is a couple inches too wide. So what I'm going to do with it is, what I basically did is I flipped it upside down so I could lay it on top of the frame rails. I could see about how much I need to remove overall. And it looks like it's about 2 inches or so. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take an inch off of both ends so I could stay somewhat symmetrical. You know, this is a four-wheel drive truck, so the engine does sit to the passenger side a bit, so you have room for the drive shaft to come to the front axle. But I've got a scribe mark here, 1 inch on both sides, like I said, and I'm basically just going to make a square cut on this. And the reason for that is I want to try to keep as much of this metal from the new cross member as possible. You know, measure twice, cut once, I think they say. Nah, what do you know? I don't know. If it doesn't fit, I just use the welder and I'll make it fit, right? But yeah, I'm going to cut the inch out of this thing. I'm going to see how it fits in the frame rails. I know I'm going to have to probably cut some of the lower portion here, just because of the overall height difference between this frame rail and what the donor truck was. But you know, I'm gonna put it in, take it out a few times until I have it close, and once it's able to fit between the frame rails, then I'll start worrying about getting the motor in to really place this thing where I know it's going to be in the right location before I even put a tack weld, a screw, anything to get this thing into place. Here's a closer up view. You can see I've got a scribe line across about as straight as I can. You know, obviously this thing kicked out before the way it was. I'm not going to worry about that. Same with this side here. Got my scribe line. Like I said, I'm going to try to take it out evenly from both sides. these holes here are what held the frame bracket or the reinforcement for the steering box. So if I can maintain these holes for alignment, that would be awesome. If I have to move them, whatever, it's not a big deal. We'll make it fit. But you know, as of right now, I've got the frame rough cut out. You know, I use the plasma torch to get the old brackets out, and I hit it real quick with the wire brush, just so I have a somewhat cleaner surface. Obviously, we'll clean this up much better when we go to weld things in. But for now, I want to just see if we can get this thing to fit between the frame rails, and then get the motor positioned a little bit better. Man, I'm telling you, that plasma cutter is the best thing I ever bought. Cut right through that. This is almost 1/4 inch thick. Doesn't really leave a lot of slag. And I mean, it's fast. I don't got to smell grinding dust. It cuts a very clean line. And it doesn't really put a lot of heat into the metal. You don't get a lot of heat to cause any kind of crazy warpage. Not that that would happen on this thing. But yeah. There you have it. There's my inch of material moved, both sides. Now we can see if this thing fits or not. Alright guys, as you can see, I've got the new cross member not welded, just rough cut basically, sitting in between the frame rails here like I wanted. It is a little tight, but I should be able to get the motor in now and sort of position this thing, not necessarily left or right, but fore and aft, so I know exactly where I want it. I'll then make marks on the frame and really clean this thing up to get it to fit exactly how I want it, nice and even, and obviously clean up all the metal and then, you know, burn this thing in. But yeah, it's roughly where I think it needs to be right now. You know, I've got the motor mount sitting just on the cross member, and then I've got the engine sitting here ready to go. Oh, one other thing real quick, man, I gotta tell you guys about this thing right here. This thing has been such a lifesaver. Not the engine hoist itself, but the ram itself. This is an air over hydraulic ram, and believe me, it is such a pleasure to use. I know a lot of people hate Harbor Freight, but that's where I got this. This thing was on clearance. I needed a new ram. I was gonna buy just the same old hand pump one, yeah, I gotta take this engine in and out a bunch of times. That's a lot of pumps to get over these giant tires, and I was really thrilled to see this thing. So yeah, I first saw this thing on, I think, Finnegan's Garage. I don't know if any of you guys follow him. He's on Motor Trend. He's got his own YouTube channel. He mentioned this once before, yeah, he's right. This thing is amazing. I mean, get the air in there. All I have to do is pull the trigger down here real quick. And there it goes. I mean, come on. I don't have to sit here and pump the jack 100,000 times. You know, granted, you're still going to have to release the pressure down there with the handle just the same. But this motor is not light, so it's, you know, got a decent amount of force to push it up. And like I said, I got to take it out a bunch of times to get it in, mock fit it, take it back out, cut, maybe weld, take it back out again. So definitely a lifesaver. I think I paid $95 for this thing on clearance, but I saw them all over the internet, roughly between $100, $160 from numerous different places. So if you're doing something like this or take a lot of engines out, I highly recommend you guys check that out. Alright guys, back in the shop. Today's plan is to basically get the transmission and transfer case mated up to the engine. That way I can make sure where I have the engine positioned right now, everything's going to work clearance wise. I mean, This thing is on a big suspension lift. It's got a big body lift. So I have a lot of room between the frame and the body and stuff. But I just want to make sure that my driveline angles are right. I have good clearance to the front drive shaft, and also to see if it's in a sort of good place to maybe reuse the front drive shaft from the 2002 model. But basically, I'm going to try to get this monstrosity into the truck from underneath because I can't get it on my hoist. It's just too big. You know, I work out of a pretty small garage here. So it doesn't fit into my shop more than up to the windshield. So yeah, that's basically my game plan this evening. I have transmission jack adapter that goes onto a floor jack. I'm going to put that onto it, try to get this transmission into the engine, and then sort of finalize the position of where the engine's going to be in the frame rails, so I can then start working and reboxing in the frame rail and getting this thing, you know, in its final resting place. So yeah, let's get everything set up. Alright guys, back at it. As you know, this is sort of a long project. It's going to take a little while. I've been sort of contemplating how I'm going to try to edit this to, you know, do the filming and stuff, because there is a lot of things I'm doing behind the scenes that I'm not recording. For that, I'm sorry. I'm also trying to just get this thing, you know, in a state where I can start really putting things together. But I'll show you guys what I have so far and what I'm currently working on. So let me turn the camera around here, show you what we got here. So as you can see, I've got the engine roughly in place where I need it. I've got some rough marks on my frame rails on both sides, so I have an idea where I want the engine crossmember to sit, and I think I have the engine in a pretty good location. I've got decent clearance on the back for the crossover pipes. I might need to clearance this area a little bit for the downpipe, but the big help here is the owner decided to eliminate the AC. Just doesn't really care much for it, rather just drive around with the windows down and the tunes up. So we will be replacing the factory air with a non-factory air box and closing up the firewall here. Some of the other things I've been working on, since I'm putting this engine in basically from scratch, there's nothing to go off of. It sits pretty high. I don't even know what the exact lift is on this thing, but it's up there. This thing sits on tractor tires. So I figure it's a good opportunity to be able to sort of correct or at least lessen the extremes on the drive shaft angle. Going off the top of my head, I know right now where it sits, I think I have about 6 degrees down on the transfer case and almost 19 degrees slope on the drive shaft, 14 degrees on my pinion. So all that being said, again, I'm going off memory here, that gives me a 1 degree angle on the pinion and almost 22 degrees angle on the transfer case, which is really, it's really high. It's a little too much. No matter how I drop the transfer case or what, the angle is still a little too extreme, and it's because the thing is lifted up. You know, the axle's sitting way down compared to the driveline angle, like just the parallel between the transfer case and the pinion, they're too far apart. The way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to have a custom drive shaft made, and I'll probably have them install a double cardan joint in front. That way those two universals will be able to compensate for that extreme slope of the drive shaft, and that should bring the drive shaft back into a realm where both the universals will last much longer, they won't bind, and I should have very little, if any, vibration out of the drive shaft. I mean, you guys know that the tires on this thing are massive, so it vibrates. It doesn't ride like a car or a modern truck anyway, but you don't want to deal with a horrendous vibration. It could just damage all kinds of things, the transfer case, the differential. You want to have those driveline angles as close to neutral as possible. Obviously it's a spring rear, so you need to have some sort of angle, but since I'm going to a double cardan, I can have my pinion angle basically point straight up towards my to my transfer case. Like I said, the double cardan is going to sort of take out, or at least split the difference between those two universal joints, and I should have a better angle. So what I'm working on right now is, if I go underneath here, I'm going to turn the camera around again. Alright, so from down below here, what I'm working on is the transmission cross member. Now I'm using the cross member from the donor truck, what's left of it there, and through this Swiss cheese of holes, I have drilled 3 new holes which correspond to the cross member from the other truck. So I have this basically where I want it. The frame rails in the 77 are much narrower than what the other truck is, so I had to section out 3.25 inches from the passenger side of the cross member. And the reason I did that was it sat relatively flat against this frame rail and still pushed the transmission to what was a really nice clearance size. It puts my, sorry, the wire's in the way here. It puts my transfer case about 1 inch away from the frame rail, so I have good clearance there. I've got plenty of clearance on top. You know what, let me see if I can turn the light on here. There we go. I have plenty of clearance on the top here, and plenty of clearance on this side as well. And the nice thing is the back side of the cross member and the engine here. The engine is sitting at a great angle. I think right now, even where it is, I'm sitting about 2, maybe 3 degrees down from the engine down on the transfer case. So let me show you guys the cross member and what I got going on there. So this is where I sectioned out the 3 inches. This thing was about 3.25 inches longer. Here's the section of it here. So I basically cut out 3.25 inches, mounted everything back in the truck, got everything lined up where I knew I wanted it, and then just quickly tack welded it with the TIG welder. But now this section should be from frame rail to frame rail where I need it. And the nice thing about this is this part sits and rests on the bottom of the inside of the frame rail. This part goes on the outside, and then there's a secondary bracket that goes from here and it will go to the inside of the frame rail towards the top. So this is really a very strong cross member. But from here, I'm going to weld this thing up solid, both sides, and then get this thing back into place. Alright, so there it is, all TIG welded up. Both sides, a little extra in the corners here. I'm just going to get this thing back in the truck because it's pretty late already tonight. So I'm just going to get this in. I still have a lot of work to do with mocking everything else up. The engine isn't even welded into place yet. But I just wanted to get this so I can support the engine and really, or the transmission I should say, and start moving a little more forward on this. I figured it'd be easy enough to section this out and weld it all up, and it was. Like I said, the secondary bracket here, I've still got to probably do some modifications for, because not only is the frame in the 77 not as wide, it's also not as tall in between the C-channel. So I'm going to get this thing back into the truck, and hopefully my transmission stays where I want it to be.